So Smarter Markets is back at the FT Global Commodities Summit in Lausanne. I'm joined by Michael Curran from Vitol. And Michael, it was great, just heard your panel talking about Article 6, CBAM, and what's happening in the carbon markets. There's been a lot of discussions of, major developments and the impact they're having. I'm curious, when you look at your business with environmental products, carbon markets, what developments are having the biggest effect on your business and the way in which you do business?
Yeah, so I think, as I was saying on the panel, I think the Article 6 is going to have the biggest impact. So, your panel was on voluntary markets. Clearly, as you flagged, the voluntary markets have really had a kicking in the last 12-18 months. However, I do think that the markets have bottomed. I think that the buyers are coming back. The lack of confidence or the disappearance of confidence has waned or is waning. And I think bringing in Article 6, even though it hasn't yet been agreed at the UN level, people are acting as if it will be agreed. And therefore, that's changing how we approach things. And as I said, in terms of contracting, we now have to contract always with corresponding adjustments being linked in some way, shape or form. We also find that from the buyers, there's more interest in having corresponding adjustments, or at least the option to have corresponding adjustments as well. So I think that's the biggest impact. For Vitol as a broader business, shipping coming into the EU ETS, the Singapore tax scheme, CBAM, that has then a broader impact across the rest of our businesses. So it just becomes a question that for Vitol, carbon is a trading book in and of itself, but carbon starts to permeate all the other books that Vitol has and starts to create more risk and opportunities for the different books as well.
I mean, it's really fascinating how it's, going from being an isolated market to, as you said, permeating everything one do, which is, ultimately what one would want if these markets are going to have an impact on our behavior.
Yep.
When you look at that, the evolving commercial needs of companies like your own, companies that you work with, what ways do you think that market and market infrastructure needs to change to keep pace with those developments?
So again, I think one of the questions on the panel I was on was what could governments do to improve markets? And I think I would repeat the same thing: create clear rules and regulations. Financial markets, trading markets, they're all based on, these are the rules. Look for the opportunities based on those rules and then act accordingly. And then, frankly, place your bets. You'll get some wrong, you'll get some right. But I think if you have a clear understanding of what is allowed, what's acceptable, what's expected, then everybody will behave accordingly. That will then release capital into these markets. Releasing capital adds additional risk. Risk has to be managed. And therefore, from a trading perspective, it adds to all the opportunity and froth, frankly, that needs to be dealt with.
Right. And you also discussed on the panel, in the absence of kind of a top-down multilateral solution, we're seeing different governments move forward at different rates.
Yeah.
How difficult is that to engage with, or what kind of opportunities does that create?
So again, I think, as I was flagging, Vitol isn't set up really to be a retail entity. Very often we end up having to act as a retail or behave in a way which is much more retail-esque. But we also do that with partners who are much more used to that kind of thing, as we call it, route to market to some extent. When it comes to the sovereigns, it's different, because then, frankly, it actually is relatively simple in the sense that they have what they expect. The rules are there, and then that's explained to you and you behave accordingly. So actually the sovereigns are, to some extent, actually simpler than the commercial stroke retail end of the business.
And when you look at that compliance that's necessary, the understanding, the types of projects that are being worked with, the myriad sets of rules, is there something you need on the technology side?
I think in terms of, we've seen a lot of these, the improvement in satellite, particularly for the forestry projects, which obviously was some of the ones that got the most criticism. I think the quality of the data is getting better, the quality of all the monitoring. And I think as that improves, the confidence will improve that, if this is a one, gold standard ton, it really is a ton of either removed or abated carbon. And I think as people get more confidence, there's more rigor in the monitoring and the data provided, I think that will give more confidence here.
Right. And when you look ahead, where do you see some of the biggest opportunities to improve the carbon markets, the environmental markets right now? Is it better education? Is it better market infrastructure, better financial technology? I know you'd love to see regulation come through that's clear. I think there's a question of does one hold one's breath for that? What do you do in the interim?
Yeah, so I think, as I was saying, the market's really voting with its feet. So we are continuing to deploy capital, to deploy risk in the absence of this clarity, because to some extent, you have to follow what you think the trends are going to be, but it almost ends up being a bit more like venture capital rather than pure trading. You have to say to yourself, look, I'm not going to put all my eggs in this basket, but I have to at least have some exposure to all of these, because it might turn out that this is the one that rockets because it gets accepted in regulated market X. This one gets rejected in regulated, and you just have to accept that it's a basket of risk that you're putting on, and you apply it accordingly. So I don't think it creates a break from us approaching things, but would it accelerate if we had more clarity? Then definitely, because the banks would be able to be more active, we'd be able to do more refis of our projects and development, etc., and therefore recycle and deploy our capital again.
And I find that last point you made really fascinating, the venture capital aspect to it, because people are often arguing, are these commodity markets? What kind of markets are these? But that's a point I don't think a lot of people are stressing enough. There's a certain venture capital aspect to this at this stage. I wonder if you could discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So I think, if you look at the myriad of different, gold standard archery, there's a myriad of different, programs that you can put your credits under. There's a myriad of methodologies. There's a myriad of geographies. So I think you just have to, again, more in that venture capital way. It's venture capital that feeds to a commoditized flow. Now, why would I call it venture capital? I call it venture capital because ultimately you don't know which one's going to win. You're trying to make intelligent bets, but you just have to accept some of them will be duds and it'll be a disaster. So they'll still generate a commoditized flow, but maybe a commoditized flow that's not worth very much or that nobody wants, which is okay, fine. And then you just have to expect or hope that your marginal cost of production on the ones that do succeed is able to fund and frankly pay off the ones that failed.
Right. And when you look out across that horizon of opportunities, you said that you think the VCM is likely bottoming, advances on Article 6. Are there certain areas, if you had to pick that horse race, I know you're managing risk, you're spreading bets, but if you had to pick an area that you think offers the greatest opportunity, what's that for you right now?
I think the greatest opportunity is a combination of, again, being intelligent of where is the lowest marginal cost of production. That's ultimately what the point of this is. And by lowest marginal cost of production, I don't mean that you go in and try and scalp a market and say, I want to buy this at $2 and sell it at 20. I think you have to have partnerships in countries such that it's fair to everybody. But to some extent, sub-Saharan Africa, we see as a great opportunity. And then if you compare that, let's say, to a Brazil, which also has a lot of rainforest, agriculture, opportunities, etc., I think it's much more likely that Brazil will have a domestic market and a lot of the credits will stay in country, a bit like Indonesia. Whereas I think if you're looking at a traded or import-export traded market, it's more likely to be the sub-Saharan Africa that will be the beneficiary in terms of FDI, etc., from these projects, and then exporting those under Article 6 with corresponding adjustments to Switzerland, etc.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.